In principle, what I'm going to talk to you about today is what I do discuss with my students in the first year. And I know you have only 45 minutes. I have only 45 minutes to talk to you. In principle, usually this talk lasts for more than an hour, but I will try to squeeze it into the time set out for you. As far as I understand, the name of William Shakespeare is familiar to you. Is it? Can you give me any names of his plays?
Romeo and Juliet.
Romeo and Juliet, great.
Much Ado About
Hamlet,
Nothing.
Much Ado About Nothing.
King Lear.
King Lear, good. Macbeth, good.
Midsummer's Night's Dream.
Midsummer Night's Dream. All in all, there are 37 plays. We have named less than 10. Okay, so I hope that one day more and more plays will be familiar to you. And again, I've been informed that you are either starting or are already in the process of your theatrical week. Is that right? Month. Okay, yeah. Century. Whatever. Anyway, when I was asked to talk to you about Shakespeare, I decided that when it comes to Shakespeare's biography, you can open any textbook and read it. My second idea was to talk to you about the possible versions of who Shakespeare might have been. Again, I suppose you have heard that there are different theories. But when finally you finish this school and come to our university, I will tell you about that. So, bearing in mind that you are interested in theatre, you are going to work on that, I've chosen this particular topic. How to read Shakespeare's plays. Meaning that we understand we live in an absolutely different environment. More than 4 centuries have passed since Shakespeare left us, whoever he was. Moreover, you and me will live in a different country from all perspectives, different language, different social organization, different history. But why is it so that even 4 centuries after Shakespeare's death, people all over the world continue to read Shakespeare? What is this mystery, this enigma about Shakespeare that makes people of different cultural backgrounds, of different ages, share this interest in William Shakespeare? Today I'm going to rather briefly give you at least some ideas on what you should take into account if you come to read a play by this great English dramatist. Yes, it does. So the first and most important thing to understand is that when it comes to the genre of plays, of drama, this is the first thing that keeps it apart and separate from any other literary genre. A play, be it Shakespeare or Chekhov or Molière, is meant to be staged and seen, not to be quietly read in a published form. So when you approach to reading any play, Shakespeare including, try to visualize the setting, how it all happens in reality, how the characters come and go, where they stand on the stage while they're interacting, whatever is happening on the stage. When it comes to Shakespeare, no secret that Shakespeare is not easy to read, even to the native speakers of the language. Because again, you understand, 4 centuries in terms of the language development means that a lot of words that Shakespeare used would fall out of usage, new words would come. Moreover, you understand that in Shakespeare's days, there was no radio, no television, no newspapers, no internet. Can you imagine for a second? There was no internet. And that is why one more function of a public theatre was to give information. Very often, the theatre goers in Shakespeare's days would come to a public theatre in order to understand more about the life around them, what was happening in their day. These allusions, they're called allusions, if you know the word, when you refer to some fact or personality or event or whatever, they are now hidden from us. And if you really want to get a better understanding of a Shakespearean play, you can find a lot of editions where the commentaries are given. So say, on the right-hand page you have the text, on the left-hand page you have a commentary. And you can more or less understand where you are. If it comes to words that are no longer in use, what do you use? A dictionary. Very good. Okay. One more very important thing to be taken into account. I suppose you know that when it comes to the people who go to a theatre, theatre goers, in English you can use at least two terms. You can call them an audience, you can call them spectators. What is the difference between an audience and spectators? Look at the words, they are there.
You can interact with the audience, but you cannot with the audience.
If you think in terms of, grand word, etymology, the origin of words, try to think of some words that you know starting with A-U-D. That's right. An audience is basically listening, while spectators watching. And in Shakespeare's days, there was not much to see, because the scenery was very, very scarce. This is, by the way, the new Shakespeares Globe theatre, which is sort of a reconstruction of what the original Shakespearean Globe theatre was like. So you can see an actor there standing on this raised platform, and the audience is listening to him. You can see some people are just standing, you see? There is part of this theatre which is called the yard, the cheapest tickets, to stand. What I did, I actually stood with my elbows on that stage. Not because I didn't want to spend another pound, but just because I wanted the experience. Okay? So, it is an audience, and that is why when you open a text by Shakespeare, you might be shocked at the amount of words, right? Because with Shakespeare, many characters would pronounce longish monologues, sometimes soliloquies, which is when the character is alone on the stage. To be or not to be, properly speaking, is a soliloquy. So in this way, you will immediately see the difference between, say, Shakespeare and Chekhov. With Chekhov, the remarks are rather short. With Shakespeare, long speeches, because the people would basically come to listen to what was being said. And as I have already said, well, today you have lots and lots of helping moments. You can surf the internet, there are films, there are performances which you can watch on the screens of your computers. But in principle, if you are reading a text, it is absolutely necessary that you use your imagination. You try to see how it all used to happen on the stage of the Globe Theatre. Today I hope I will have time to try and get to this difference between a modern theatre in terms of its construction and the Globe Theatre. So, quoting Hamlet, when you see a text, it's not just reading words, words, words. It is basically trying to get involved into what is happening, how they interact, why they do it, what are the conflicts, what is the life like at that time. And one more very interesting phenomenon which pertains basically to the dramatic art more than to, say, a work of prose. Though, in some respect, they are comparable. I understand that you are a generation of great speed. Have you ever tried rereading a work of literature? For what purpose?
Same experience.
Huh?
To feel the same experience.
Uh-huh. From the plot, basically, I guess. Okay? But if you have already read the text and keep it in your memory, then there is no intrigue. Okay? But when it comes to a real, what we call classical literature, I would say that it would always be sort of grateful to you for double reading. Because when you read any text for the first time, what are you basically interested in? Who married whom, who killed who died of what reason? But when you read it for the second time, you do not concentrate on the details of the plot. You have a very good chance to concentrate on how it is done, the stylistic peculiarities, the choice of words that the author has done for our purpose, because you understand, when we read a text, the author basically creates it for you and me, the readers, the so-called addressees of the text. So the second or the third reading, which is done with no hurry, you can do it slowly, as if you are biting something very tasty and delicious. But again, I repeat, that basically pertains to what is called real literature. And I would say this is sort of a test for real literature. If you want to read it again, just because you want to see how words are combined, this is a feature, a significant hallmark of real outstanding literature. And now we are coming to something which pertains specifically to drama. When you are reading a novel, it usually takes you several days, several weeks, okay, depending on how quickly you can read and how much time you can set aside to read it. When it comes to a play in a theater, how long does a play usually last? About 3 hours maximum, okay? 3 hours maximum, which means that you go through the text from beginning to end in 3 hours. And there is a better chance that you remember at the end of the play what happened or was said at the beginning of the play. With a book, sometimes you have to turn the leaves back. And that is why here I would like to introduce a very important concept which I have called stage polyphony. Do you understand the word polyphony? Polyphony. Sounding differently. Okay? Sounding. It's a musical term in general, but was adopted into literary criticism. And before I get to this quote, I will give you a very simple example of what is understood by stage polyphony. Imagine for a second that you go to a theater for a performance of the Little Red Riding Hood. You understand what I mean? Okay, you all know this tale. And naturally this is a theater for children who would be interested in the Little Red Riding Hood. Imagine that you are just escorting your younger brother, sister, whoever. And the play starts. And the greedy grey wolf appears on the stage and says, "Oh, my stomach is churning, I'm so hungry, I want a breakfast." And we hear a little voice of the girl somewhere behind the stage singing a song. "Ah, that's my breakfast coming." And the wolf hides behind the bush. And the Little Red Riding Hood appears. What do children usually do? They scream what? "Beware! There is a greedy grey wolf behind the bush." It's a very primitive example, but by this I mean to say that a dramatic text is actually double-oriented. On the one hand, it is a dialogue between the characters, But there is always the third part, as it were, the audience, who are always there, and for whom there are no secrets. They know characters come and go. They might not be on the stage when something is discussed, but you are. You would not shout out, "Beware of the wolf," but at least you will understand that some characters are sort of tricked. They do not know the truth. To turn to Shakespeare. Did anyone mention King Lear? Do you more or less understand what King Lear is about? The king who is old of age decides to retire and to give his kingdom to his 3 daughters. And in the first scene, King Lear talks to his courtiers in the presence of the audiences, you understand. And he says something like, "I have split the kingdom into 3 equal parts. Equal parts." And then he invites his daughters to praise him and says, "The one who praises me best will get the best part of the kingdom." See? And we already understand that this is cynicism. We understand that he is cheating on his daughters. Okay? And the 2 elder daughters compare their feeling to their father, to the sun, to the salt, whatever. And then comes the youngest daughter, whose name is Cordelia. Cord. Сердце. Cord. We know what happened at the end. And when the youngest daughter is invited to give her speech, "What is it you, my youngest and most beloved child, can say?" And she says, "Nothing. So young and so untender." And she says, "So young, my lord, and true." And when you think of the word true in this narrow context, you would probably understand it as telling the truth. But when you read or watch the play to the end, you understand that Cordelia was actually the only one who remained loyal and faithful to her father. And we understand that her statement at the beginning, "So young, my lord, and true," actually echoes in the final scene, when she remains the only one who is truthful, who is loyal, who is faithful to her father. And this, again, I say, is more evident in a play because of the limit of time. Sometimes it can happen in a novel as well, but for the reader it's very often difficult to remember the details, something that was said at the beginning. And another important thing about understanding Shakespeare's plays is the fact that there is a lot of redressing. Somebody mentioned Twelfth Night, I suppose. Somebody said Twelfth Night, no? No? Okay, anyway. In Shakespeare's plays, very often, a girl would dress up as a boy. And the explanation is very simple. All the actors were men. And again, the characters would not know that this young page is in the heart of the heart, young Viola, the girl. But the audience would. This is what I try to describe as the stage polyphony. The term is mine. The quote is from the book Introducing Shakespeare, which basically talks about the same thing. And again, as we are separated from Shakespeare by this huge gap of time, again, reading Shakespeare today, you should not commit sort of a very popular mistake, trying to apply modern views to what people thought and understood as good or bad, to use very simple terms, in the days of Shakespeare. And I personally think that when you come to read a play by Shakespeare today, there are 3 basic parameters, 3 basic groups of facts that you should take into account. First of all, it is the historical and social events of Shakespeare's time, because William Shakespeare did not write for you and me. In actual fact, you understand, in Shakespeare's day, a play was staged for some period of time, and then a new one would come. Shakespeare's plays were, by the way, published only several years after his death. And we can't be absolutely sure that what is published is exactly what was staged, because a period of time had passed. So he did not think of other generations to come. Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, when he made a very free translation of «Экзоги монумент», «Я памятник себе воздвиг нерукотворный», he was not, well, to a certain extent he was speaking about himself. But if I ask you a simpler question, «Экзоги монумент», «Я памятник себе воздвиг», I'm not sure that everyone knows the poem. But all of you would basically know Evgeny Onegin. Did you do it? Have you done it already? Good. To whom is Evgeny Onegin addressed? I don't mean the dedication. I mean the reader. What sort of reader did he have in his mind when he wrote Evgeny Onegin? Хорошо. Онегин, добрый мой приятель, родился на берегах Невы. Продолжите. Спасибо. Пожалуйста, тогда громче, если они не знают. Где, может быть, родились вы или блистали мой читатель? He didn't write for в салазки жучку посадив. Шалун уж заморозил пальчик. He was writing for his contemporaries, basically living in St. Petersburg and belonging to his social circle. And in Evgeny Onegin there are other references to that as well. А вы, читатель благосклонный, в своей коляске выписной, оставьте град неугомонный, где веселились вы зимой. Град неугомонный? Петербург. Exactly. So with Shakespeare we have to understand that a public theater at that time was not meant for the nobles. It was the middle and lower classes. People of higher society were not expected to go to a public theater. If they wanted some experience, the theatrical company would go to their places to give performances. And why is this important to remember? Because Shakespeare would take into account the interests of his audience. Shakespeare, may I remind you, lived basically in the second half of the 16th century. He died in 1616, in early 17th century. Do you do any history of Britain? Would you know who Shakespeare's monarch was? Elizabeth I, right you are. So now I will be passing to the historical events. His queen was Elizabeth I. What was wrong with her?
She was supposed to be...
That's right. She never officially married. She never officially gave birth to any children, which might be a tragedy for an ordinary woman, but it is a huge national tragedy for the country. Why? Because the country has no heir to the throne, a definite heir to the throne. And closer to the break of the centuries, Elizabeth I was already very much advanced in years. There was no hope that she would ever give birth to a lawful heir. And that is why Shakespeare and his contemporaries were worried about the future of England. What is going to happen after Queen Elizabeth's death? Who is going to be the next monarch? And hence, when I asked you about the plays, none of you mentioned his historical plays, but Shakespeare also wrote historical plays. And some of his dramas can be more or less seen as plays dealing with the essence of monarchy. Why was this so vital? Just because they were wondering what's going to happen, what sort of monarch they're going to have, and how that would influence their everyday life. So hence Shakespeare's histories plus Hamlet, Macbeth, King Lear, they are all about the essence of the monarchy. And this is what the audiences in Shakespeare's days wanted to get information about, or at least start thinking about with the help of a dramatic performance. Plus to that, the society, feudal society, the feudal pyramid, the monarch at the top, the sovereign at the top, the nobility, the middle class, the lower classes. Again, if you read Shakespeare's plays attentively, you will see that even if we come across kings, queens, or nobles, it is not so much about their social status. It's about them as human beings. And only in Romeo and Juliet, which you all know very well, okay? Would you remember how the conflict between the two families, how is it finally solved? The two star-crossed lovers die, and what happens after that? They, who they? The two families on their own will, or do they have somebody to pacify them? Okay, in the very last scene, there appears the Doge of Verona, who has no other function in the play but to appear at the very end and set piece. I'm not sure of your knowledge of ancient Greek theater, no?
So it's like
Deus ex machina, right you are. Deus ex machina, absolutely. When there is no other function of this nobleman but to set peace. Okay? And basically, when you are reading a play by Shakespeare, we deal with middle and lower classes. And of course, the hilarious, funny elements come with the representatives of the lower class. The principles of family life. Another thing which is drastically different today and in Shakespeare's days. Funnily, I would say that for the Russian audience, Shakespeare is more understandable. Because I still hope that we haven't yet madly switched to the ideas of feminism. We still believe that the man is the head of the family. The Russian saying is, the man is the head, the wife is the neck. Where the neck turns, the head goes. Anyway, in Shakespeare's days, the father was an indisputable master of the situation. No questions were to be asked. The fathers would decide who their daughters are supposed to marry. And again, I rely on Romeo and Juliet. Yeah? It was her father's decision that she should marry fair Paris. And when the mother tries to say something like she isn't yet 14, do you remember what the father said? Younger women made good mothers. Look at yourself. Okay? So very often, young girls were given in marriage to the men whom their fathers would choose. And it meant that while living in her father's family, the girl had no possessions of her own. Everything belonged to the father. And he would provide her with all the necessities. When she got married, everything, even what she brought from her family, belonged to her husband. He was supposed to provide her, whatnot. But, don't you triumph there. When a young girl is given in marriage to an adult or sometimes even elderly man, what is the natural consequence?
Her husband dies.
And she becomes a very rich widow. And now she can choose who she wants to be her husband. How does this correlate with Shakespeare? I suppose you are familiar with Hamlet, right? And you remember that Prince Hamlet came back to Denmark from Italy, where he was a university student. So he was sort of a foreigner, not so much familiar with the situation at home. And of course we understand if we say Denmark, we mean England. Whatever the name of the place, it is the English way of behaving. He comes back to find his mother married to his uncle. And he's shocked. But the audience isn't. Because it was clear that even if an ordinary woman would choose a new husband, then the queen needed the king to help her. So for the audience, it was no surprise. But it was a big surprise to Hamlet and sometimes to the modern reader who would not take that into account. So the principles of family life are to be taken into account as well. Plus to that, we should remember that William Shakespeare and his contemporary playwrights could not just let their imagination run wild and imagine characters whatever they could only invent. They could only write for the company group, for the group of players that were involved in this particular theater and in this particular theatrical season. They would try to adjust their text and their characters to what they really had in terms of the players. They could not invent. And again, when you read Shakespeare's plays attentively, and you find that, say, several plays written and staged within a close period of time would have a character who is described as very tall and thin, it means there was an actor who could actually employ this character on the stage. So he would use the physique of the actors. On the other hand, the playwrights were sort of limited, especially when it came to the leading actors. If I ask you for a second to describe Hamlet to me, Hamlet in terms of age, in terms of height, in terms of the color of his eyes, his complexion, what do you make of Hamlet? How old do you think Hamlet was?
Pretty young.
1920. Okay. Tall, short?
Tall.
Tall. Color of the head, blonde, black? Blonde. Eyes? Blue. Complexion? Thin. Okay. You know, have you watched the film Hamlet,
Yes.
That's exactly him. You're describing him. But if you read the play attentively, or you listen to the text if you are watching a performance, those who read Hamlet or watched the film, you remember there is a famous scene with the grave diggers. Poor Yorick. Okay? And one of the grave diggers says, in passing, I've been in this profession for 32 years since Prince Hamlet was born. So Prince Hamlet was not that boisterously young. Okay? Hamlet. Othello. What do you make of Othello? Huge. Huge! Black. He was not that black, he was a Moor. Okay. Strong build. What about the age? What do you think? Those who know the play? older than Hamlet. Yeah, okay, he was a hero, we remember everything. King Lear. Very old. Tall, short? Short, white hair. Okay, thin, right, okay. Surprise, surprise. All these characters were played by one tragic actor, Richard Burbage. And when Shakespeare was creating these characters, he actually had Richard Burbage in mind. So Hamlet, King Lear, Othello were all of the same height, of the same build. Well, you understand, you can more or less disguise the age for King Lear, you can disguise the skin for Othello, but even in the text of Hamlet, we see the evidence that he was not that young. And continuing with that, the fact is that in Shakespeare's days, I don't think this is a secret for you, all the parts were played by men. And the audience saw it as the norm. They would not expect a woman on the stage. Don't believe the film Shakespeare in Love. If you know this film, don't believe. It's impossible for a noble woman to, even in a disguised form, to find her way on the stage. So all the parts were played by men. Oh, yes, by men. And this had to be taken into account. First of all, when it came to young heroines, Juliet, Desdemona, Viola, can you imagine, Juliet was played by a man. And naturally, when we speak of these young heroines, they were played by boys. They were played by boys who had to be very talented in order to be persuasive, because you understand that if we speak of Juliet or Desdemona, they play a very important role in the play. And the boys could play those parts before their voices broke. Interestingly, with Shakespeare, when it comes to female characters, they are either very young or quite old. So you understand, if Hamlet was 32, his mother was over 50, with all probability. So with Shakespeare, you don't find middle-aged heroines. They're either very young or quite old. And another thing, which is now hidden from us because of mass culture, if you rely on the films or modern performances, it's one thing. But if you rely on the original of Shakespeare, with him, there are no scenes of open sexuality. There might be an occasional kiss on the cheek, and that's it. Just because the audience knew very well that all the parts were played by men, not to embarrass the public. Okay, and finally, so this is what I meant, that all the parts are played by men. By the way, this is, up to nowadays, the basic principle of the new Shakespeare Globe theatre. They stage only plays of Shakespeare and his contemporaries, and in most cases, they stick to this principle that all the parts are played by men. I was very lucky when I once was to this theatre. I saw Richard III with a female cast. All the parts were played by women, and it took me just 1 or 2 minutes to get adjusted, to forget immediately that Richard was played by a woman. I suppose that was the same effect. But with Shakespeare's audiences, they didn't have to adjust. They knew it in advance that all the parts would be played by women. And this is the reconstruction of the Globe Theatre, which I recommend you have on your mind, in your mind's eye, this is another quote from Shakespeare, when you are reading a play. Remember, it was written for this particular stage. In which way is this stage different from our modern theatre? What differences do you see? One of them is very evident. In the middle of the audience. Right. Do you see any curtain?
No.
No. There is no curtain. And moreover, the action takes place among the audience. You may be standing around the stage. Nothing is hidden from the eyes of the audience, which actually means, and you know in Shakespeare there are lots and lots of cases when the characters die. So what should happen after somebody is killed on the stage? They have to take the dead body away. Otherwise it would be lying there till the end of the performance, and then pop up and say hello. Othello ends with Desdemona's death. She is strangled. And as you might see at the back of... Какую тут кнопочку нам нужно?
Верхнюю.
А?
Верхнюю там.
Самую верхнюю.
Да.
Окей. No. No. Please no. Please no. Okay, you can see that at the back there are some stage doors. And when Othello says, down goes the curtain is over there. So Desdemona is strangled behind the stage. And then this part of it is shut. And these stage doors were used by the actors to come on the stage. Plus to that, they might have come from the audience. You see there is a small staircase. And in the middle of the stage, this little piece is the so-called door to hell. Go to hell. He goes to hell. But if it weren't for that stage door, Shakespeare would not have included the grave diggers, because this space was used as if it were a grave. Okay? And above the stage you can see this sort of balcony where the musicians, if music was accompanying, or some VIPs might be sitting. But if it weren't for that balcony, what would not be there? The scene from Romeo and Juliet. So on the one hand, Shakespeare was limited by the construction of the theatre. But on the other hand, he would exploit every single detail of the playhouse in order to create his scenes, his images, and his plays. 45 minutes have passed. I could have continued for another 45, but questions? Anything you would like to ask? Any questions? Have you understood what I said?
Yes.
Do come to Moscow State. I will continue with the lectures. Any questions on this? Elderly audience. No?
Just
Have I given you some guidelines to read Shakespeare?
Sure.
I hope so. I hope so. That was the main purpose of my trip.
Okay. First of all, we would like to give you in gratitude with the words of Shakespeare. We just wrote it. There's a poem that GPT wrote for us, knowing Shakespeare. To thee, fair mistress of our learned flock, from pupils' hearts a sonnet doth emerge. In gratitude we humble giveth thanks for sharing with us Shakespeare's wondrous words. Thy knowledge vast with grace and passion cheer hath opened our minds to Bard's eternal flame. A spark ignited love for plays and verse, and you found joy within our youthful souls. To see the world through his perceptive eyes and revel in the artistry of speech. Thine eloquence hath truly set us free to cherish and embrace his legacy. O lady scholar, now we fain impart our deepest gratitude from pupil hearts.
Thank you so very much. Just for me to remember.
And-
Thank you very much.